Some promises are made in silence, carved into the heart with invisible ink that only love can read. They are whispered in moments when time stands still, when two souls recognize that everything they've built together hangs in the balance of a single decision. This is the story of Marcus and Elena, whose love was forged in the crucible of war, tested by impossible choices, and ultimately defined by a promise that would change everything. In a world where duty calls louder than desire, where honor demands sacrifice, and where coming home isn't always guaranteed, some warriors fight their greatest battles not on foreign soil, but in the space between staying and leaving. This is their story, raw, authentic, and achingly human. Marcus Santiago had always believed that courage meant running toward danger, not away from it. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. His hands, calloused from years of handling weapons and machinery, now trembled slightly as he folded his uniform and placed it in the military-issued duffel bag. The morning sun filtered through the bedroom window of their small apartment, casting long shadows across the floor where Elena sat watching him pack. She had been silent for the past hour, her dark eyes following his every movement. Elena Morales was not the type of woman who broke easily. As a trauma nurse at the county hospital, she had seen enough pain and loss to understand that life rarely offered guarantees. But watching the man she loved prepare for his third deployment felt different this time. There was something in the air, an unspoken tension that made her chest tight with worry. "You don't have to do this," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've already served 2 tours. You've given enough." Marcus paused, his hand resting on a photograph of them taken at her sister's wedding just 6 months earlier. They looked so happy, so certain of their future together. He had been planning to propose that night, had the ring hidden in his jacket pocket, but the call from his commanding officer had come first. Another unit needed an experienced sergeant, they said. Lives were on the line, they said. The mission was critical, they said. "You know I can't turn my back on my brothers," Marcus replied, not meeting her eyes. "They're counting on me." Rodriguez is just a kid, barely 19. Thompson's wife just had a baby. These guys need someone with experience watching their backs. Elena stood up and walked to the window, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Outside, their neighborhood was waking up to another ordinary Tuesday. Children waited for school buses. Neighbors walked their dogs. And somewhere a radio played soft jazz music. It was the kind of peaceful scene that Marcus had fought to preserve in distant lands. Yet now it felt like a world he might never truly belong to again. "What about what I need?" Elena asked, turning to face him. There were no tears in her eyes, just a raw honesty that cut deeper than any argument could have. "What about the life we talked about building together? The house with the white picket fence, the children we wanted to have, the quiet Sunday mornings we promised ourselves." Marcus felt his resolve waver for the first time since receiving his orders. He had always compartmentalized his feelings, trained himself to focus on the mission rather than the personal cost. But looking at Elena now, seeing the way the morning light caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes, he felt the carefully constructed walls around his heart beginning to crack. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. She fit against him perfectly, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the rapid beating of his heart. They stood like that for several minutes, holding on to each other as if they could somehow stop time through sheer force of will. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "God, Elena, I love you more than I ever thought possible. But these men, they're like family to me. I can't abandon them now, not when they need me most." Elena pulled back enough to look into his eyes. She had fallen in love with Marcus's sense of duty and honor, the way he always put others before himself. It was one of the things that made him extraordinary, but it was also the thing that might ultimately tear them apart. "I know you do," she said softly. "And I love you for it. But I'm scared, Marcus. I'm scared that one day you won't come back to me. I'm scared that your sense of duty will take you away from me forever." The weight of her words settled between them like a physical presence. They both knew the statistics, had heard the stories of soldiers who left home with promises to return, and never made it back. The war had been dragging on for years, claiming lives and leaving families shattered in its wake. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away the single tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I will come back to you. I promise you that. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, I will make it home." Elena searched his face. looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. What she found instead was the same unwavering determination that had first attracted her to him at a mutual friend's barbecue 2 years earlier. Marcus was not a man who made promises lightly, and he was not a man who broke them easily. "Okay," she whispered, placing her hands over his. "But I need you to promise me something else. Anything. Promise me that you'll be careful. Promise me that you won't take unnecessary risks to be a hero. Promise me that you'll remember that you have someone here who needs you to come home in one piece." Marcus nodded, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like salt and hope and desperate love. They both knew that in 6 hours he would be on a plane heading toward another continent. Another war. Another chance to lose everything that mattered. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of final preparations and stolen moments. Elena made his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, and they ate in companionable silence, both trying to memorize the simple pleasure of sharing a meal together. Marcus double-checked his gear while Elena packed him homemade cookies and a thermos of the coffee blend he preferred. As the time for his departure approached, their apartment filled with an almost unbearable tension. Every shared glance felt significant. Every casual touch carried the weight of goodbye. They had said goodbye before, but this felt different somehow. More final, more desperate. Elena's sister Carmen arrived to drive them to the base, her presence a welcome buffer against the emotional intensity of the moment. Carmen chatted nervously about her job at the elementary school, about their mother's arthritis, about anything that might distract them from the reality of what was happening. But even her cheerful chatter couldn't completely mask the gravity of the situation. At the military base, families gathered in the parking lot for final farewells. Children clung to their fathers, wives embraced their husbands, and mothers held their sons with fierce protectiveness. The scene played out with heartbreaking familiarity, the same rituals of love and loss that had been repeated countless times throughout history. Marcus shouldered his duffel bag and turned to face Elena one last time. She looked beautiful in the afternoon sunlight, wearing the blue dress he had bought her for her birthday. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the silver earrings his mother had given her last Christmas. He wanted to memorize every detail of this moment, to carry this image of her with him through whatever lay ahead. "Return fast," she whispered, stepping close enough that her words were meant for him alone. "You understand why." The simple phrase carried layers of meaning that only they could fully comprehend. It was a reference to their first real conversation about the future, when Marcus had admitted his fears about balancing military service with building a life together. Elena had told him then that she understood his duty to his country, but that she needed him to understand her need for him, to prioritize their relationship too. It was about balance, about finding a way to honor his commitments while still nurturing their love. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a realignment of priorities that both frightened and exhilarated him. Looking into Elena's eyes, he realized that she wasn't asking him to choose between duty and love. She was asking him to find a way to honor both, to serve his country without sacrificing their future together. He paused for a long moment, studying her face as if he were seeing it for the first time. Then he leaned down and whispered in her ear, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll be back soon." It was a vow, a commitment that transcended duty and reached into the very core of who he wanted to be. In that moment, Marcus understood that being a warrior wasn't just about fighting battles on foreign soil. Sometimes it meant fighting for the things that mattered most, even when the odds seemed impossible. Elena closed her eyes and nodded, pressing a small, wrapped package into his hands. Inside, he knew, was the silver St. Christopher medal that had belonged to her grandfather, a man who had served in Korea and come home to build a beautiful life with the woman he loved. It was her way of saying that she believed in him, that she trusted him to find his way back to her. As Marcus boarded the transport with his unit, he tucked the medal into his chest pocket right over his heart. He could feel Elena's eyes on him as the bus pulled away from the base, and he pressed his palm against the window in a final gesture of connection. The distance between them grew with each passing mile, but the promise they had made to each other remained as strong as ever. The journey to the deployment site would take 26 hours, with stops for refueling and connecting flights. Marcus settled into his seat and pulled out the photograph from their last vacation together. A weekend trip to the mountains where they had hiked to a secluded waterfall and talked about their dreams for the future. In the picture, Elena was laughing at something he had said, her head thrown back with pure joy. Looking at that photograph, Marcus made another silent promise. He would not just survive this deployment. He would find a way to build the life they both wanted, to honor his duty while still being the man Elena needed him to be. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. but he was determined to prove that love and duty didn't have to be mutually exclusive. The plane lifted off into the darkening sky, carrying him away from everything he held dear. But for the first time since receiving his deployment orders, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He had made his choice, not between Elena and his duty, but to find a way to honor both. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer walking it alone. He carried Elena's love with him, and the promise he had made to her, and the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for, even if that meant fighting his way home. The forward operating base in Afghanistan felt like stepping onto the surface of Mars. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, all rocky terrain and dust that seemed to coat everything within minutes of arrival. Marcus had been deployed to remote locations before, but this place had an edge to it that put everyone on high alert from day one. Intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity in the region, and their mission was to establish security for a nearby village that had been cooperating with coalition forces. Marcus quickly fell into the rhythm of military life, but something was different this time. During his previous deployments, he had thrown himself completely into the mission, allowing the intensity of combat operations to consume his thoughts and energy. But now, Elena's face appeared in quiet moments throughout each day. When he cleaned his weapon in the evening, he thought about the way she hummed while doing dishes. When he wrote reports late at night, he remembered the sound of her laugh echoing through their apartment. The unit Marcus had been assigned to was a mixed group of veterans and newcomers. Rodriguez, the 19-year-old he had mentioned to Elena, was indeed young but showed promise as a soldier. He reminded Marcus of himself at that age, eager to prove himself, maybe a little too willing to take risks. Thompson, the new father, carried pictures of his baby daughter and talked about her constantly. The kid couldn't even roll over yet, but Thompson swore she was already showing signs of exceptional intelligence. Their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harris, was a career military man who ran a tight operation, but genuinely cared about his soldiers. He had been watching Marcus closely since his arrival, noting the sergeant's experience and natural leadership abilities. During their second week at the base, Harris called Marcus into his office for a private conversation. "Santiago, I've been reviewing your service record," Harris said, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat across from his desk. "Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. 2 previous deployments, multiple commendations, and the respect of every soldier you've served with. Your squad leaders speak very highly of your tactical judgment." Marcus nodded politely, unsure where the conversation was heading. "Thank you, sir. I just tried to do my job and keep my people safe." Harris leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with sharp eyes. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. I'm putting together a special operations team for some high-priority missions in the coming months. These would be dangerous assignments, but they could significantly impact the success of our overall mission here. I want you to lead the team." The offer hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he considered the implications. Special operations missions were exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward assignments that could make or break a military career. They were also the kind of missions that dramatically increased the likelihood of not making it home. "Sir, can I ask what kind of timeline we're looking at for these operations?" "Classified details, obviously, but we're talking about a 6-month extension to your current deployment. Maybe 8 months if the situation develops the way intelligence suggests it might." 8 months. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he calculated the math. His current deployment was scheduled for 10 months, which would already push their relationship to its limits. Adding another 6 to 8 months would mean being away from Elena for well over a year, possibly closer to 18 months. "I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me, sir," Marcus said carefully. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Harris nodded, but his expression suggested mild surprise. In his experience, ambitious soldiers jumped at opportunities like this without hesitation. "Of course. Take a couple days to consider it. But Marcus, opportunities like this don't come around often. This kind of experience could set you up for a significant promotion track when you return stateside." That evening, Marcus sat on his bunk staring at Elena's photograph. Around him, other soldiers were engaged in the familiar rituals of downtime, writing emails home, playing cards, reading paperback novels that had been passed around the unit so many times they were falling apart. The normalcy of it all felt surreal when measured against the weight of the decision he was facing. He pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter to Elena, something he had done every few days since arriving at the base. But this letter was different. How do you explain to someone you love that you might be asking them to wait even longer than originally planned? How do you justify choosing duty over the promises you made? 3 weeks into the deployment, their unit received their first major assignment. Intelligence had identified a compound about 15 kilometers from the base where insurgent leaders were reportedly planning attacks against the village they were protecting. The mission was to conduct a nighttime raid, capture or eliminate the targets, and gather intelligence about future operations. Marcus found himself in the familiar mental space of pre-mission preparation. He checked and rechecked equipment, went over the tactical plan with his team, and reviewed contingency scenarios. But underneath the professional focus, Elena's voice echoed in his memory. "Promise me that you won't take unnecessary risks to be a hero." The raid itself went smoothly from a tactical standpoint. They approached the compound under cover of darkness, encountered minimal resistance, and successfully apprehended 2 high-value targets along with valuable intelligence materials. But during the extraction, Rodriguez made a mistake that almost cost him his life. The young soldier had gotten separated from the group while clearing rooms and found himself cornered by an insurgent who had been hiding in a back bedroom. Marcus heard the gunfire and made a split-second decision to double back and provide support, even though protocol called for maintaining the extraction timeline. He found Rodriguez pinned down behind an overturned table, with the insurgent firing from an elevated position. In that moment, Marcus had a choice. He could call for backup and wait for a coordinated response, which might take precious minutes that Rodriguez didn't have. Or he could move immediately, using his experience and training to neutralize the threat quickly. The first option was safer and by the book. The second option was exactly the kind of unnecessary risk Elena had asked him to avoid. Without hesitation, Marcus chose to act. He used a tactical maneuver he had perfected during his previous deployments, moving quickly through the compound to flank the insurgents' position. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, but in that brief window, Marcus felt the familiar adrenaline rush that came with combat. It was the same feeling that had drawn him to military service in the first place, the sense of being completely alive, completely focused, completely essential to the moment.
The mission ended successfully, with all personnel returning safely to base.
Rodriguez was shaken but unharmed, and the intelligence they had gathered would prove valuable for future operations. But that night, as Marcus lay in his bunk replaying the events, he felt a troubling disconnect between the soldier he had been and the promise he had made to Elena. He had saved Rodriguez's life, and he felt good about that. His quick thinking and decisive action had prevented a tragedy that would have devastated a young man's family back home. But he had also taken exactly the kind of risk that Elena had asked him to avoid. The line between necessary heroism and unnecessary recklessness seemed blurrier than ever. 2 days later, Lieutenant Colonel Harris approached him again about the Special Operations position. This time, he had more details about what the missions would entail. The team would be conducting deep reconnaissance operations behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence that could prevent large-scale attacks against coalition forces. The work would be dangerous, but it could save hundreds of lives. "I need an answer, Santiago," Harris said. "The first mission is scheduled for next month, and I need time to prepare the team." Marcus stared at the map on Harris's desk, studying the red dots that marked known insurgent positions. Each dot represented a threat to the security they were trying to establish, a potential source of violence against innocent civilians. The rational part of his mind understood that neutralizing these threats was important work that needed to be done by experienced soldiers. But the part of his mind that belonged to Elena understood that accepting this assignment would fundamentally change the promise he had made to her. It would mean actively seeking out the most dangerous missions available, volunteering for the assignments most likely to result in casualties. It would mean choosing duty over the commitment to come home safely. "Sir, I need to respectfully decline the Special Operations assignment," Marcus said finally. "I believe I can best serve the mission in my current role with my current unit." Harris looked genuinely surprised. "May I ask why?" "This is exactly the kind of opportunity that advances careers, Santiago. You're throwing away a chance at significant promotion." Marcus thought about how to explain his reasoning without sounding unprofessional or uncommitted. How do you tell a career military officer that love had become more important than advancement? How do you justify turning down a prestigious assignment because of a promise whispered in a bedroom half a world away? "Sir, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to serve effectively," Marcus said carefully. "I believe I can have the most positive impact by focusing on training and supporting the soldiers in my current unit. These are good men who need experienced leadership, and I think that's where I can make the biggest difference." It wasn't the complete truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Marcus had discovered that mentoring younger soldiers like Rodriguez gave him a sense of purpose that was different from the adrenaline rush of high-risk missions. There was something deeply satisfying about sharing his experience and knowledge, about helping ensure that other people's sons and husbands made it home safely. Harris accepted his decision with professional grace, though Marcus sensed some disappointment. The colonel had been counting on him for the special operations team, and finding another qualified leader would not be easy. But he respected Marcus's right to make his own career choices, even if he didn't fully understand the reasoning behind them. That evening, Marcus wrote a long letter to Elena describing his decision. He couldn't share specific operational details, but he could tell her that he had chosen to honor the promise he had made to her. He had put their future together ahead of military advancement, and for the first time since arriving at the base, he felt completely at peace with his choices. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm for Marcus and his unit. They conducted regular patrols to maintain security in their assigned area, worked with village elders to build trust with local populations, and continued training exercises to maintain readiness. The work was important but not particularly glamorous, exactly the kind of steady, professional service that Marcus was learning to value. During one patrol through the village they were protecting, Marcus had a conversation with an elderly man named Hassan, who had lived in the area his entire life. Hassan spoke some English and seemed genuinely grateful for the security that coalition forces were providing. But what struck Marcus most was something the old man said about the nature of courage. Many young men think bravery means never being afraid. Hassan said as they shared tea in the afternoon shade. But I have lived through many wars, and I have learned that real courage means being afraid and choosing love anyway. The words stayed with Marcus. As he continued his deployment, he began to understand that the choice he had made wasn't about avoiding danger or shirking his duties. It was about redefining what it meant to be brave. Real courage might mean turning down prestigious assignments in favor of building a life with someone you love. Real heroism might mean choosing to come home instead of seeking glory on distant battlefields. As his deployment moved into its 6th month, Marcus received word that his unit would be rotating home on schedule. No extensions, no special assignments, no requests for volunteers to stay longer. Just the simple, beautiful promise of returning to the life he had temporarily left behind. He began counting down the days with an anticipation that surprised him. During his previous deployments, the prospect of going home had always been mixed with uncertainty about readjusting to civilian life. But this time, he knew exactly what he was going home to, and exactly why that mattered more than anything else he could accomplish in uniform. The night before their departure, Marcus sat outside his barracks, looking up at the same stars that Elena could see from their apartment balcony. The distance between them felt both infinite and insignificant. Soon, very soon, he would be able to keep the promise he had made to her. He would return fast, and she would understand why that mattered more than any medal or commendation he could have earned by staying longer. The military transport plane descended through low clouds toward the airfield, and Marcus felt his heart rate increase with each mile that brought him closer to home. Around him, his fellow soldiers displayed the same mixture of excitement and nervous energy that always accompanied homecomings. Some were quiet and contemplative, others were animated and talkative, but all of them shared the same underlying anticipation of reuniting with the people they loved. Marcus clutched Elena's letters in his hand, a thick stack of envelopes that had sustained him through 10 months of deployment. He had read each one dozens of times, memorizing her words and the small details of her daily life that she shared with him. She had written about her work at the hospital, about their friends' weddings and babies, about the changes she had made to their apartment, and about the dreams she continued to have for their future together. In her most recent letter, received just a week before his departure, Elena had included a photograph of herself standing in front of a house with a for sale sign in the front yard. It was a modest 2-story home with a white picket fence and a large oak tree in the backyard. Exactly the kind of place they had talked about buying when he returned. Her note on the back of the photo simply read, "Still available. Still dreaming." The plane touched down on American soil at 0800 hours on a crisp Tuesday morning in early spring. As the soldiers gathered their gear and prepared to disembark, Marcus felt a profound shift in his identity. For 10 months he had been Sergeant Santiago, squad leader and professional warrior. But now, stepping off that plane, he was ready to be Marcus again. Elena's Marcus, the man who had learned that coming home was just as brave as staying away. The reunion ceremony was held in a large hangar, decorated with yellow ribbons and welcome banners. Families had been gathering since dawn. Children holding handmade signs, spouses dressed in their best clothes, parents clutching flowers and American flags. The sound of the crowd was a joyful cacophony of voices, laughter, and barely contained emotion. Marcus scanned the crowd for Elena's familiar face, his eyes moving quickly over the sea of people. For a moment, panic touched the edges of his consciousness. What if she hadn't come? What if 10 months apart had changed her mind about their future? What if the promises they had made to each other had proven insufficient to bridge the distance that war created between people? Then he saw her, standing near the back of the crowd with Carmen beside her. She was wearing a blue dress. Not the same one she had worn when he left, but the same color that had become symbolic of hope in his memory. Her hair was longer now, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she looked more beautiful than his dreams had remembered. When their eyes met across the crowded hangar, everything else faded into background noise. Elena began moving toward him through the crowd, and Marcus found himself walking faster than military protocol suggested was appropriate. Other reunions were happening all around them. Fathers sweeping children into their arms, wives embracing husbands, mothers crying over sons who had grown taller in their absence. But Marcus was aware only of Elena's approach and the way his heart seemed to expand in his chest with each step that brought them closer. When they finally reached each other, they stopped just inches apart, both suddenly uncertain about how to bridge those final few inches. 10 months of separation had created a space between them that felt both familiar and foreign. Marcus could see new lines around Elena's eyes, evidence of the worry and stress she had carried during his absence. Elena could see changes in Marcus too, a new scar on his forehead, deeper shadows beneath his eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "You came back," Elena whispered, her voice breaking slightly on the words. "I promised I would," Marcus replied, reaching up to touch her face with trembling fingers. Then they were in each other's arms, holding on with desperate intensity, trying to make up for 10 months of missed embraces in a single moment. Elena buried her face in Marcus's neck, breathing in the familiar scent of him beneath the unfamiliar smell of military-issued soap and foreign dust. Marcus pressed his lips to her hair and closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to believe that he had actually made it home. They stood like that for several minutes, oblivious to the celebration continuing around them. Other families were taking photographs, sharing stories, beginning the process of reintegration that homecomings required. But Marcus and Elena existed in their own bubble of reunion, communicating through touch, all the things that letters and phone calls hadn't been able to convey. Finally, Carmen approached them with tears in her eyes and a camera in her hands. "I hate to interrupt," she said with a shaky laugh, "but I promised your mother I would document every second of this moment, Elena." The drive home from the base passed in comfortable silence, with Elena's hand resting in Marcus's and Carmen chattering nervously about family news and neighborhood gossip. Marcus watched familiar landmarks pass by the car window, marveling at how unchanged everything appeared. It was a common phenomenon among returning soldiers, the sense that time had stood still at home while moving at light speed in the deployment zone. Their apartment felt smaller than Marcus remembered, but also more precious. Elena had clearly spent time preparing for his return. Fresh flowers sat on the kitchen table, his favorite beer was stocked in the refrigerator, and she had hung new photographs on the walls, pictures from their life together before deployment, reminders of the foundation they had built and were now ready to continue building upon. The first few days of reintegration were both wonderful and challenging. Marcus and Elena rediscovered the rhythms of shared domestic life, but they also had to navigate the ways that 10 months of separation had changed them both. Elena had become more independent, more confident in her ability to handle problems on her own. Marcus carried new experiences and perspectives that sometimes made civilian life feel surreal and disconnected from reality. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their time apart and rediscovering the easy intimacy that had always been the cornerstone of their relationship. But they also had difficult conversations about the ways deployment had affected Marcus's worldview and Elena's understanding of what it meant to love someone whose job regularly put him in harm's way. One evening, about a week after his return, they were sitting on their apartment balcony watching the sunset when Elena brought up the house she had mentioned in her letter. The for sale sign was still in the front yard, she told him, and the price had actually come down slightly since she had first inquired about it. "I know we talked about waiting until you were out of the military to buy a house," she said carefully, "but I've been thinking about what you said before you left, about finding a way to honor your duty while still building our life together." Marcus turned to look at her, intrigued by the direction of the conversation. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that maybe we don't have to wait for perfect conditions to start building the future we want," Elena replied. "Maybe we can find a way to create stability and build equity, even if your job requires occasional separations. Maybe the house becomes an anchor that keeps us grounded no matter what else happens." The idea appealed to Marcus more than he had expected. During his deployment, he had often thought about what it would mean to have a real home base, a place that belonged entirely to him and Elena, rather than temporary military housing or rental apartments. The prospect of creating something permanent together felt like a natural next step in honoring the promise he had made to prioritize their relationship. They spent the following weekend driving out to look at the house. It was even better than the photographs had suggested, a charming 1950s ranch home with original hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and a backyard that was perfect for the children they hoped to have someday. Standing in the empty living room, Marcus could easily imagine their future there. Lazy Sunday mornings, holiday gatherings with family, quiet evenings reading books by the fireplace. "What do you think?" Elena asked, watching him explore the space. "I think it feels like home," Marcus replied honestly. They made an offer that afternoon, and it was accepted 3 days later. The process of buying their first house together felt like a declaration of faith in their future, a tangible commitment to the life they were building together. Even if Marcus's military career required future deployments, they would have this place as their anchor, their reminder of what they were working toward and protecting. As they signed the closing papers a month later, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he packed his deployment bag. He was still a soldier, still committed to serving his country and protecting the values he believed in. But he had also learned that true strength sometimes meant knowing when to say no to assignments that would compromise the things that mattered most. Elena had changed too during his absence. She had become more confident in her ability to advocate for what she needed from their relationship, more willing to articulate her own dreams and expectations. The woman who had whispered, "Return fast, you understand why," had grown into someone who could say clearly and directly what kind of future she wanted to build with him. Their first night in the new house, they sat on the front porch steps sharing a bottle of wine and talking about their plans for the space. Elena wanted to plant a garden in the backyard, maybe add a porch swing to the front of the house. Marcus was excited about finishing the basement, creating a workshop where he could pursue the woodworking hobby he had abandoned during his military career. But more than the specific improvements they wanted to make, they were both thrilled by the sense of permanence the house represented. This was their place, their investment in a shared future that could weather deployments and relocations and all the other challenges that military life might throw at them. 6 months after Marcus's return, he received an unexpected phone call from Lieutenant Colonel Harris. The colonel was rotating back to the United States and had been offered a position at the Pentagon. He was putting together a team of experienced NCOs to work on training and development programs for deployed forces, and he wanted Marcus to consider joining the assignment. The position would be based in Washington, D.C., which would require Marcus and Elena to relocate. But it would also mean no more combat deployments, no more separations, no more promises whispered in the dark about returning safely. It was the kind of assignment that could launch Marcus into the senior leadership ranks of the military, while also allowing him to build the stable family life he and Elena both wanted. Marcus discussed the opportunity with Elena over dinner that night, laying out both the professional advantages and the personal implications of accepting the assignment. They would have to sell the house they had just bought and move to a much more expensive area. Elena would have to find a new job and rebuild her professional network in a new city. But they would also be able to start the next chapter of their lives together without the constant threat of separation hanging over their relationship. "What do you want to do?" Elena asked after he had explained all the details. "I want to do whatever gives us the best chance of building the life we've talked about," Marcus replied. "I want to make choices that honor both my service and our relationship. I want to keep the promise I made to you." Elena smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Then I think we should go to Washington. I think it's time for both of us to try something new." The decision felt right as soon as they made it. Marcus accepted the Pentagon assignment, and Elena began the process of transferring her nursing credentials to Maryland and researching hospital systems in the D.C. area. They put their beloved first house on the market with mixed emotions, but also with excitement about the opportunities that lay ahead. On their last night in the house, they sat in the empty living room surrounded by boxes and memories. The space that had represented permanence and stability was about to become part of their past, but the relationship they had built within its walls was moving forward with them. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked quietly. "Turning down that special operations assignment? Choosing to come home instead of extending your deployment?" Marcus considered the question seriously before responding. During his months at the Pentagon, he had encountered other soldiers who had made different choices, who had prioritized military advancement over personal relationships. Some of them seemed genuinely fulfilled by their careers. Others carried regrets about missed opportunities for family and connection. "No," he said finally. "I've never regretted keeping the promise I made to you. If anything, I'm grateful that I learned the lesson early enough to matter." Some guys spend their whole careers trying to figure out how to balance duty and love. I figured it out at 28, and that's given us extra years to build something real together. Elena curled up against his side, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside their window, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, the kind of scene that Marcus had once fought to protect in distant countries. Now he understood that he didn't have to choose between protecting his country and protecting his relationship. He could do both, but it required wisdom about which battles were worth fighting and which opportunities were worth accepting. "I love you," Elena whispered into the darkness. "I love the man you were when you left, and I love the man who came back, and I love the man you're becoming now." "I love you too," Marcus replied, tightening his arms around her. "Thank you for believing in us even when the distance made it difficult. Thank you for understanding why I had to serve, and for helping me understand why I needed to come home." As they prepared to leave for Washington the next morning, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. He had learned that being a warrior didn't require sacrificing everything else that mattered. Elena had learned that loving a soldier didn't mean accepting whatever terms the military dictated for their relationship. Together, they had discovered that some promises are worth keeping, even when they require difficult choices, and that true courage sometimes means choosing love over glory. The warrior had kept his promise to return fast, and the woman who loved him had understood why that mattered more than any medal or promotion. Their story was just beginning, but it was built on a foundation strong enough to weather whatever challenges lay ahead. They had learned to fight for each other, and that was the most important victory either of them could imagine. "Return fast, you understand why," she whispered. The warrior paused and murmured, "I'll be back soon."